Howdy. Alright, now we're going to go over the basics of how an engine works. This is the block. Usually there's a head mounter. I took them off so you can see. This is irrelevant to what we're talking about. Now what happens is there's a crank right through here, right through the center. Eccentric, they're called journals, which is where the cap and rod hook onto. So when this turns around, it pushes the whole piston up and down. And there's 4 strokes to it, 4-stroke motor, obviously. When it's coming up like this, it's either the exhaust or compression stroke. We'll just start with compression because that's where we're going to start. When it's all the way up, it's compressed all of the fuel and air that is in there. When the spark plug ignites, it pushes it back down, like so.
We're doing a video for history. People keep calling that fucking.
Okay, now that we're back on this.
We're still recording?
Yeah. When the air-fuel mixture combusts, it pushes the piston back down like so. And when it gets all the way back down to the bottom, comes back up again, like this one is, it'll start pushing out all the exhaust through the exhaust valve. I'll show you that in a second. And then it'll go back down again, sucking in all of the new air-fuel mixture. On older motors and most GM motors nowadays, there's a cam in there, inside, right through here, right through the block. And it turns, it's hooked to a chain to the crank. By gear on the crank, there's gear on the cam, through a chain it turns. The crank turns the cam. When the cam turns, it pushes on lifters and push rods, which are basically little rods that come up. You just move up and down when the load's on the cam, push them up and down. When it pushes up on the push rod, step over here. Come here, Ed. This is an overhead valve head. When you get into a high point on the cam, it pushes up on the push rod, and basically this rocks around. It pushes down on this spring, and through the center of the spring is a valve, like so. And this part is hooked down to the block. And this valve will open and let all exhaust out. This valve will open and let air in. This one opens right after this one, and then boom, and then out goes exhaust. Okay. Where am I going with this now? Oh yeah, let's flip the sucker over. Basically, when the motor's turning over, here are rod caps, and here the rods go down straight to the pistons. And when it turns over, basically moves them back and forth, up and down. Reciprocates. And what else am I trying to say here? Sorry, I'm at a loss for words right now. What else? It's all together with bolts. On newer motors, they have overhead cams. Basically what that is, instead of chains running from here to here for the crank, here's the crank, the cam usually sits right in here. Instead of a chain running from there to there to turn the cam, now they have overhead valves for cams, which basically the cam sits on top of the head, like this one over here, but instead above it, instead of inside the block. And the cam's still the same, but when it turns, instead of pushing up on push rods and rocking a rocker, you just push it straight down on the valve springs and opens up the valves. And you can, if you have a V motor like this, overhead cams gives you 2 cams, which means you can have twice as many valves, which means more efficiency. You guys, you're awful. there's a whole accessory drive system here. There's a bunch of pulleys and a belt. Basically, the belt will turn this. This is a water pump, which pumps water through the motor and the radiator to keep it cool. This is air conditioning. It really doesn't. You don't need it for the motor. What sits in between the heads is an intake manifold. The throttle body on the end of an intake manifold. We'll get to that a little later. Stop.
Hello. Now we are back. We're going to show you how, with a full motor, how it comes in and exits the motor. Talking about air. First, fuel. And fuel. We can't really show fuel. All right. So first it goes into the throttle body. Goes past the mass airflow sensor, which meters the amount of air that comes in. Goes into the intake manifold, down through the intake runners, which follow all the way back in here, back into the head. And then it goes through the head, which does its magic, with springs and valves and things. Goes down into the cylinders, which work the pistons. We've discussed this already. Comes back up into the head, in which this time, rather than going out the intake, it goes on this side and comes out the exhaust manifold, which goes down through, which goes through your catalytic converters, your mufflers and things, out through the end of your exhaust pipe.
Well, we're going to go into depth a little bit more about how this engine controls fuel and spark. As James said earlier, as the air enters the throttle body, it goes down in through the intake, and the PCM has a specific time based on input from the crank position sensor when it squirts fuel in. Fuel squirted in here in the injectors goes into the intake port, intake valve opens, lets the air and fuel mixture into the cylinder. Compression stroke comes up, squeezes the mixture, and as it reaches top dead center, meaning the piston's at the top of its travel, it sparks, igniting the fuel-air mixture. Piston goes back down due to the power stroke. Exhaust valve opens, piston comes back up and pushes it out of the exhaust manifold and out to the rear of the vehicle. That's about it.
This is how spark works. Every time. Imagine.
And Ed loves it.
Imagine.